Warning: the following video contains explicit language, which may be offensive to some viewers or inappropriate for children. The content within this video is intended for mature audiences only.
Are you ready?
Hey everybody, it's Jeff. So today in Maine, cloudy, cool, and I don't know if it's gonna rain, probably not, but they did say it would tomorrow, so at least it's cool. Boy, we had a few bad days of heat there, boy, I'll tell you. We had that big thunderstorm, which, as I've been driving around, I've noticed some damage, other damage that occurred probably from the initial gusts of wind that came in before the storm. Some big blasts of wind. So in that cemetery that's just up the road from me, Mount Hope, big thick trees, got big huge branches broken from that. And Hannaford, the grocery store that's up near the mall, the Bangor Mall, they lost the power the day I was out in the rain getting groceries and I came home. It must have happened right after I got home. They lost the power and they lost everything in the store that goes in the freezers. So everything was taken out, and today when I went back in there, I guess, or no, it was yesterday rather, when I went back in there, they had that all roped off while they were trying to pull all the stuff out. I don't know what they did with it. I can't imagine that, much of it was spoiled, but I guess there's regulation where, they can't keep it, even if it ain't spoiled. But all the stuff was taken out, and they had to restock all those freezers again from scratch, and it's like, Jesus, I mean, they must have lost a lot of money there. And I'm surprised they don't have their own backup generator for that eventuality, You would think that if they're running power to keep freezers going, they'd want a backup generator, because we lose the power, pretty often. I'm not going to say all the time, but in the winter, and then when we have these winds, I mean, power loss happens. And you think they would have a backup generator just to keep those freezers going, right? But guess not. And they lost everything in there. So, geez, because I went in there, wanted to buy some frozen pizzas. Nope, they ain't got no frozen pizzas. That's all. They emptied that right out. So anything that had to be in the freezer, frozen vegetables, ice cream, pizzas, anything that has to go inside those things, they had to empty that all out and dump it. So I was like, damn. So anyway, I got me a new shirt at Walmart. It's actually Godzilla here. You can't really see it. Let me tip it here a little bit. You can see Godzilla right there. Nice shirt. It's stretchy. And I went to Taco Hell to get something to eat, and when I went in there, everybody's like, "Oh, that's a nice shirt," and they're going, and then they told me about Temu, and they were saying how you can find shirts like that on Temu for really dirt cheap, and I was like, well, I got this at Walmart, and I didn't pay much for it, and so they started on that, and so people liked it. It's like I said, it's got lots of green on it, kind of fluorescent, a little bit. I don't think the camera really picks it up, but it kind of glows a little bit. But it's a nice shirt. I like Godzilla. When I saw it, I was like, oh, cool, I'm going to get that. It has some buttons here on the top, but like I said, it's very, very like stretchy, like spandex stretchy. So I hope when I wash it, it doesn't ruin it in some way, so I got to be careful how to wash this thing. I don't want to ruin it. I want to keep the shirt as long as I can. Anyway, a topic of conversation had come up here on TV when I was watching the news, and somebody, and it wasn't like the main topic, but it was somebody had brought a point up in a conversation about Donald Trump and his party, Trump campaign, sending out feelers basically into the military to find loyalists in the military should he win the presidency. And they're looking for, generals that'll pledge their loyalty to Trump and not so much to their job or to their own oath to protect the United States and the Constitution. So they didn't really go too deep into that, but it got me to say, well, maybe there's a deeper story here with that. So I went online and I was looking up some stuff online, and it brought me to an older story. If I can get to it here. Whoops. That came out in 2020 about Donald Trump, and let me see if I can just lay this out here. This was from NBC, entitled "Feeling Betrayed, Trump Wants a Second Administration Stocked with Loyalists," and this was like I said, 4 years ago. Sitting in the Oval Office in the infancy of his presidency in 2017, Donald Trump found himself surrounded by new aides who had worked for other prominent Republicans, including Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, his most bitter rival from the previous year's primaries. The, quote, America First, unquote, president evidently worried that they wouldn't now put the American president first. Trump went around the room Inquisition style, asking each aide to declare allegiance, according to a person who was present. Quote, he was quizzing people in the Oval if they were loyal to him or previous bosses, unquote, the source recalled 7 years later. But no matter how much emphasis Trump put on loyalty to his first term, he found himself disappointed and frustrated when people he had hired chose other considerations over his instructions, their own reputations, their future ambitions, and even the Constitution. During one meeting, 3 years into his term, the president sat with his third defense secretary, Mark Esper, a top aide who had been tasked with installing loyalists in the administration and other senior advisors. The aides wondered aloud how they had kept missing the mark and choosing people who weren't loyal enough. Quote, Trump said, we can't let that happen again, unquote, according to a source familiar with the conversation. From Attorney General Jeff Sessions allowing for the appointment of the Russia probe special counsel Robert Mueller to Attorney General William Barr refusing to declare the 2020 election invalid, and Vice President Mike Pence's declining to reject electors, Trump felt he had been betrayed by the very officials who owed him the most. Esper, too, would later be unceremoniously cast out after being at odds with Trump on a number of issues. Now, as he contemplates a second stint in the Oval Office, his fixation on fealty appears to be growing, and some people who have spent time close to the former president say they believe it will be the singular criterion for presidential appointees if voters give him what he wants. Trump has repeatedly brought up the issue of loyalty in his public remarks as well. On the eve of the Iowa caucuses, he emphasized that point at a rally. He went after Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, his competitors who were once his allies, and, as a contrast, he stood with his one-time rival Doug Burgum as the governor of North Dakota offered him an endorsement. Quote, there's something about the lack of loyalty in politics, unquote, Trump said. Trump's success in a second term will hinge on bringing in people committed to his agenda, top appointees from his first term say. Trump and his allies have big plans for a second term and still fresh memories of a drawn-out 4-year battle against a hostile administrative state. But without committed allies in key roles, ambitions to gut the federal bureaucracy, overhaul rulemaking, and slash budgets could wither and die. Quote, they have to be resolute with their commitment to the president's vision, unquote, a top Trump official said of those who could find themselves tapped for plum roles. Quote, you weren't elected, you're a cabinet person as part of the executive branch, and your job is to understand and execute, unquote. Quote, the headwinds will be significant, unquote, he added. Allies of Trump, who was term limited if reelected, are aware of the need for a slate of officials willing to execute his vision and prepared to quickly kick into gear. Quote, you have 4 years, you have 3 or 4 major things you can accomplish, major things, and you have to have the full support of a team that's loyal, unquote, an outside advisor to Trump said. Quote, I think the president is going to have that, unquote. A former White House official speaking about the plans to send in loyalists who are better prepared to execute Trump's agenda said, quote, we're not going to sit around and wait for the Senate, which is very, very divided, and not even in the hands of conservatives to get things done. Things will be happening even before Inauguration Day, unquote. Already conservatives are laying the groundwork for quote-unquote shock troops to take administration posts in a second Trump term, with one group, the Association of Republican Presidential Appointees, hosting a 2-day, quote, presidential appointee boot camp, unquote, in the Washington suburbs. The boot camp promises to give would-be appointees insight into, quote, the operating context in which appointees work to implement the president's agenda, unquote, and, quote, tactics appointees can use to help the president gain control over the levers of power and thwart a hostile bureaucracy, unquote. And yet Trump's campaign team has tried to put a lid on a constellation of outside groups that are dreaming up wish lists of appointees and an agenda for a prospective next term. Quote, the efforts by various nonprofit groups are certainly appreciated and can be enormously helpful, unquote, Trump campaign senior advisor Susie Wiltz and Chris LaCivita said in a statement in November. Quote, however, none of these groups or individuals speak for the President Trump or his campaign. We will have an official transition effort to be announced at a later date, unquote. Okay, that was 4 years ago. Now, all what I just read to you here has had a place in this Project 2025 outline that the Heritage Foundation had put out for the Trump campaign on what needs to be done on day one if Trump becomes president again, okay? This is part of it now. So what they were talking about 4 years ago is still on their minds, okay? And here now I'm going to go to a more recent article here by Steve Bannon from MSNBC, who writes in the Maddow blog and titled, Why Trump's Vow to Fire Woke U.S. Generals Matters. It's no secret that Donald Trump has repeatedly clashed with U.S. military leaders, but it appears that the Republican has a plan to address this if voters give him a second term. The former president apparently intends to kick many generals out of the armed forces. In his latest Fox News interview, which aired on Sunday, Trump boasted that he got to know, quote-unquote, real generals, unlike the U.S. military leaders who, quote, want there to be woke, unquote. He didn't explain what that meant. Quote, are you going to fire those generals, unquote, one of the co-hosts asked, quote, the woke generals at the top, unquote. The presumptive GOP nominee replied, quote, yes, I would get rid of them. But see, now I know them. I didn't know them before, but, I came in, what do I know? I was a New York real estate person, but no, I would fire them. You can't have woke military, unquote. There's considerable evidence of Trump denigrating those who serve in the military, disparaging wounded veterans, referring to soldiers missing in action as losers, blaming military leaders for failed missions he approved, and even downplaying the importance of troops with traumatic brain injuries. But in recent years, the former president has shown particular disdain for generals. While in office, for example, the then president reportedly lashed out at generals as, quote, a bunch of dopes and babies, unquote, while publicly going on the offensive against his own former defense secretary, retired General James Mattis, whom he accused of acting like a, quote, unquote, Democrat for questioning the White House's less defensible national security moves. After leaving office, Trump went after retired General Mark Milley, the man he tapped to serve as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, falsely accusing the Army general of having committed a quote-unquote treasonous act, adding that, quote, in times gone by, the punishment would have been death, unquote, suggesting he might yet target Milley again in the future. Trump added, quote-unquote, to be continued. Now, however, the Republican apparently has more expensive plans for a second term, planning to fire U.S. military leaders who fail to meet his ideological standards. At first blush, this might not seem especially surprising, but let's not forget that a bedrock principle of the American experience is that we have an apolitical armed forces filled with service members who are loyal, but not to an elected leader, but to the U.S. Constitution. If Trump intends to politicize the military, filling the ranks with loyalists, it sets the stage for a dramatic and fundamental change in how the United States is supposed to operate. Okay, so this article I just read was published June 4th. So it says it's still on his mind. And when I reflect back in history on a time when a leader wanted his generals to be loyal to the leader and not to the country, I think of Stalin. Okay, I think of Stalin. And because in history, Stalin got rid of generals, sent them to the gulag, right? And in some cases, never to be seen or heard from again. And what he was left with was people who were not as good as the generals he got rid of, okay? Because a lot of the generals that he sent away were brilliant military leaders. But he was doing this at a time when Germany was, on the rampage, Nazi Germany. And when Hitler decided to turn against Russia, Stalin found himself with a bunch of substandard generals who didn't really know their job that well, and they damn near lost the country. Okay, if you look at the casualties that that country suffered during World War II, Russia suffered the most. Of course, it's a bigger land, but they suffered way more casualties and deaths and all that than any of the other countries during World War II. And a lot of that can be chalked up as they didn't have the right generals in place or the right leaders in place. They were too scared to balk Stalin, and so they just did what he did. I mean, even Hitler was that way. I mean, Hitler, he had his military scared shitless of him. So even the good generals that he had were too afraid to suggest that Hitler was wrong about something, and they just went ahead and did it and sacrificed some good soldiers in the process. So they became traitors to their own country, these generals, and they knew this. That's why they hoped that they could win, because if they lost, they knew their heads would be, pretty much on the pike later on. Now for Trump, he's following that same kind of logic. And because he's not that smart, and he didn't study history, he's trying to make this country step into that same trap, where he's got people out there going around asking military leaders, if Trump appoints you to this position, are you going to stay loyal to him? And he's going to find that a lot of the people are going to say, look, according to my oath, I pledge allegiance to the Constitution, to my duty to protect this country. Yes, the president's the commander-in-chief, but I'm not going to put all my eggs in his basket, because what if that commander-in-chief is flawed, like Hitler? Then that puts me in the position of having to betray him. But the way his oath is, he's not betraying anybody if he stands against his own commander-in-chief for making some bad choices. Okay, he's actually required under his oath to protect this country from enemies, foreign and domestic, you see. So if, you know, Trump is looking for these generals to basically upend their oath and say that their loyalty is to the man himself. Therefore, the ones that won't do that, which in my opinion are the better leaders because they understand their oath, okay, they're going to be quickly sidelined. Maybe not sent to a gulag, but they certainly probably won't be able to stay in the military. Okay, so he'd get rid of them. And so we'd be left with military leaders who are maybe not all the best. They're like the second best. Okay, so that's going to diminish our national security. You know, it's gonna erode it by doing that, by playing that game. And right now, with where the world is right now, China, Russia, things going on in Israel, Hamas, we don't need second best right now in our military. What we need is the best. Okay, those people who earned their stars, you know, their stars, and earned it with great work and intelligence, okay, and their loyalty. Those are the ones we want sitting in those positions in our military, next to the president, who will give that man, you know, sound advice, and not just, you know, blowing smoke up his ass to butter their bread, you know, as it were, to stay in, to keep their job. We need somebody who can't be compromised, you know. So, you know, in World War II, it was a good example of that because we put our best generals out there, you know, to fight that war. And that's the reason why, you know, when we entered it, you know, we did as well as we did, you know, and won that war. If it had gone the way Trump's doing it, who knows how the outcome would have been. You know, we were up against two countries who were stuck in that quagmire that Trump is trying to put in front of us right now. Nazi Germany and Russia, and both those countries lost everything, you know, at the end of World War II. Yeah, sure, Russia won, but only because we entered the war. If we hadn't, I'm sure Germany eventually would have taken that country. I mean, they were already outside of Moscow, you know. So, I mean, it was only a matter of time before that country would have fell, and they would have been under German rule. So, you know, like I said, and the reason being is the fact that both the leaders in Russia and Germany wanted loyalists to them instead of, you know, to their cause and to their country. You see, that's the reason why they suffered the most in that war. And so, I feel like, you know, why does this guy Trump here feel like he can do this all over again and think that it's going to work a third time? You know, because the other two times it didn't work, but we're going to try a third time because third time's the charm. Yeah, let's do it here in this country. Let's try doing that same flawed piece of logic here in America, and watch what happens to the country as a result. Okay, we're going to look just like the surface of the moon here. You know, if we ever get into a war with some country or something like that, because the generals were too busy kissing the leader's ass to give him what he wants, because they didn't want to lose their job, and it led us into a war that would devastate our country and possibly the rest of the world. You know, think about that. I mean, we've made movies about a crazy American leader or a president getting his way, and it led to the end of the country. You know, how many times we've taught ourselves that. So I can't say that the people in America are kind of like, huh, what are you talking about? I think they know exactly. You know exactly what I'm talking about here on this point here. And because Trump is out there already, and he's not hiding it. Okay, he's not making any attempt to hide what he's thinking. He's already got people out there looking for someone on day one. You remember he says day one, I'm going to be a dictator? You better fucking believe it. He's been working on that for the last 4 years here, okay? And if you're not keeping up with the things that he says, okay, You can't laugh it away and just say, oh, he's just being funny. No, he's not being funny. He's not looking for laughs. Okay, he's putting feelers out there. He wants people to understand that he means business on day one, because he's pissed off after 4 years of being harassed and intimidated and brought to court to answer for crimes he's committed. He's sick of it. He wants revenge. He wants revenge, and he's going to get it. You know, if he becomes president, he's going to get it, and no one's going to be safe. You know, not even our country. Our national security is really on the line. If he becomes president, we're in danger. All right, let's go to a commercial break. We'll be right back.
This is me.
This is me.
This is me!
This is me.
I'm Alex Curtis. I'm a lobsterman in Maine, and this is me.
I'm Ruth McLaughlin, and this is me.
I'm Eric Hopkins. I'm an artist, and this is me.
This is me.
Me.
This is me.
This is me.
This is me.
At the end of the journey, the main thing is you, original.
I'm proud to be promoting the God Bless the USA Bible. It's my favorite book.
I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody.
Donald Trump found guilty all 34 counts of falsifying business records.
Donald Trump's hush money payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels.
She'd had an affair with Trump.
I am the chosen one. The Trump Organization frauded the state of New York.
$354 million.
I'm very greedy.
We must make America pray again.
How stupid are the people of the country to believe this crap?
And the Biden administration has been more successfully economically interventionist than the New Deal.
Close, once again, to the Fed's 2% inflation target.
These markets that just are running at an incredible pace.
Climate investments, healthcare reforms, corporate tax reform.
Insulin price caps, prescription drug reform, and Affordable Care Act subsidies.
Groundbreaking chips and science law that's going to ensure that technologies and jobs of the future are made here in America.
More than 1 million veterans and survivors are currently receiving PACT Act benefits.
In America, we leave no veteran behind. From the American Rescue Plan that helped create nearly 10 million new jobs. And given people in this nation, working people, middle-class folks, people who built the country, a fighting chance. We'll rebuild America's roads, bridges, ports, deliver clean water, high-speed internet.
15 million jobs.
That's the strongest two-year growth in history. And all this progress is part of our vision and plan and determined effort to get the job done for the American people. Got it.
heart of the entertainment value of a lifetime.
I loved it.
It was the best performance I've seen in a lifetime.
I loved the show. I liked it very much. He's a very entertaining man. It's well worth the money.
Now appearing in Charlottetown, coming to Halifax November 6th to the 18th, and St. John November 20th through the 26th.
Welcome back. So, this week, and I think it was yesterday when the decision came down that the Supreme Court decided they were going to uphold the domestic violence gun restriction from, keep it in place, as it were. So that way people who are involved in domestic violence cases or found guilty in such a case would not be allowed to have a gun, which makes sense to anybody. I mean, why would you want to give criminals guns, right? Why would you want to do that? I mean, even if you're a gun lover, there has to be some common sense in your brain that suggests, look, we don't want to lose our right to have guns, so let's keep the guns away from potential problems that would come up to draw the Democrats back into the argument of taking them away from us, right? I mean, if they're so interested about protecting their Second Amendment rights, that's one way they can go without actually saying we don't want our guns taken away. They can just say we don't want criminal people to have these guns, okay? And who would be crazy enough to say no, we can't do that? Of course, one of these days that's probably what's going to happen. People are going to say, "Oh, everybody's got a right to a gun, no matter what." Because there's already mouths out there that are doing that. So here's a story here. Here's an article rather about that. Yesterday's thing here on NBC, written by Lawrence Hurley. Though the Supreme Court on Friday upheld a federal law that prohibits people subjected to domestic violence restraining orders from having firearms, taking a step back from its recent endorsement of a broad right to possess a gun. The court, on an 8-1 vote, ruled in favor of the Biden administration, which was defending the law, one of several federal gun restrictions currently facing legal challenges. The ruling indicates that some long-standing gun laws are likely to survive despite the court's 2022 decision that expanded gun rights. In that case, the court for the first time ruled that there is a right to bear arms outside the home under the Constitution's Second Amendment. Writing for the majority in federal's ruling, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote that since the United States was founded, quote, our nation's firearm laws have included provisions preventing individuals who threaten physical harm to others from misusing firearms, unquote. The provision at issue in this case, quote, fits comfortably within this tradition, unquote, he added. In reaching its conclusion, the court did not embrace some of the arguments made by the Biden administration in defense of the law, including that the government can disarm people who are not, quote-unquote, responsible. Attorney General Merrick Garland welcomed the ruling, saying the law, quote, protects victims by keeping firearms out of the hands of dangerous individuals who pose a threat to their intimate partners and children, unquote. The decision came just a week after gun rights advocates won a big victory when the court ruled that a federal ban on bump stock accessories for semi-automatic rifles, which make them fire more rapidly, was unlawful. The case before the justices concerned Zaki Ramey, a Texas man whose partner obtained a restraining order against him in February of 2020. He argued that he cannot be prosecuted under the federal gun possession restriction in light of what the Supreme Court concluded. Ramey's lawyer, Matthew Wright, declined to comment. Eric Pratt, Senior Vice President at Gun Owners of America, a gun rights group, said that while Ramey is a quote-unquote dangerous individual, the ruling, quote, will disarm others who have never actually committed any domestic violence, unquote. Although the vote in Friday's ruling was lopsided, with only conservative Justice Clarence Thomas dissenting, the ruling nevertheless exposed divisions among the justices on the gun rights issue, with 5 justices writing separate concurring opinions explaining their views. Those extensive opinions will help shape how the court will approach future gun cases, several of which are currently pending. In 2022, a decision in a case called New York State Rifle and Pistols Association versus Bruin said gun restrictions had to be analyzed based on a historical understanding of the right to bear arms. As such, the decision raised questions about many existing gun restrictions that gun rights activists say are not anchored in historical tradition. One of those other laws, which bars users of illegal drugs from possessing firearms, has drawn scrutiny in part because Hunter Biden, President Joe Biden's son, has been charged with violating it and has mounted a constitutional challenge. The 3 liberal justices on the conservative majority court were all in the majority while making it clear they disagree with the 2022 ruling. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, who was appointed by President Biden after that decision was issued, said the new case, quote, highlights the apparent difficulty faced by judges on the ground, unquote, in deciding which gun laws should be upheld in light of the earlier ruling. In his dissent, Thomas stuck to his views that the history of similar laws at the time of the nation's founding is detrimental. Other justices are more willing to consider laws that are not exactly the same, but have a similar effect. Even though it was an 8-1, Thomas decided he's going to be that one that's going to say, no, domestic violence abusers should have guns, right? Because there's history to show that it worked better when everybody had a gun, right? Can you point to a time, where people all were armed that showed that crime was out of control? Of course not, because they never kept any fucking records of that shit in those days, right? So it's easy to go back and say, oh, from the founding of this country, everybody was armed, and that's the way it should be. Yeah, okay, that really worked out. Right? We still got to prepare for incoming British invasion even today. The British will come to try to take our country. Because that's what the Second Amendment, that was the kind of thing that it was written under, okay? At the time they had wrote that out, that's the situation our country was in. We didn't really have a good military. We had to depend on everyday people to arm themselves and to be mobilized as a militia to fight back, an invasion. Because we were just starting. We didn't have the time really to have a big fucking army, and England knew that too. They figured it would be easier to take our country then because we didn't really have a system in place officially that was a military that could withstand them. England had been around for hundreds of years before, and they had a practice, and efficiency in fighting wars. But over here, we had to think outside the box, and that meant we had to give people the right to have weapons, and then coalesce into a militia, and we regulate that militia, okay? So that way they function under the authority of the government, under the president, right? That's like the early days of what we got today, except it was, like I said, in its infancy. And under that, which is when we read the Second Amendment, and it talks about, being under the guidance and the regulation, in a militia, words to that effect. It doesn't say flat out that people have a right to carry, to have weapons, period, okay? It doesn't say that. There's a stipulation embedded in that says, in the situation of being in a militia, yes, it's regulated, okay? And if they're going to have arms, they belong in a militia, so that way everybody's working together as a unit to fight. I mean, it's better that way, right, than just have people working all alone trying to fight the war. It's better when everybody's working together than it is alone. So inside that Second Amendment, there's a little bit of thought there about the logic of having everybody working together and it all being regulated under authority of the government, because military officials had more training, more understanding of how to fight a war than just your everyday farmer, okay, whose priority hadn't been to train in the military, okay. So if they wanted to fight, they had to find a militia unit to join up with and fight with them, So yes, they could have a gun, they get a gun. You have to have a gun, right? You got to fight, I mean, I'm sure some people probably thought they could fight using other weapons, but back then the flintlock and all that shit, that was what was in. So everybody was using the most modern thing they had. So, the Second Amendment, as you read it, you got to put yourself in the frame of mind of the people who wrote that, what was going on then. And then if you can think that way and understand why they wrote it that way, then you'll understand how that Second Amendment really doesn't apply as well to today's times as it did then, which means it really should be rewritten, I think, to reflect today's problems, because we're allied with England now, and we're not expecting an invasion from them, and we don't need militias anymore because we have National Guards now. That's what the militias were. They became National Guards, okay? That's how that evolved into what it is today. So now the National Guard, which is under the authority of the government, it's more official now. People are trained to be in the National Guard. So that way they're not just coming out of their farms or off of their jobs at Walmart or McDonald's or something. They're trained first, and then they're put into this National Guard / militia, okay? And their job is to protect the country. They're sort of like, what do you call it, the backup from with the front line, behind the front line fighters, which is the active duty. Those are the front line fighters. The militia is your second line of defense, okay? We've used the second line of defense in primary attacks before in the past. I don't know why they did it that way, but how successful that was. But sometimes I think, when they need to have all the military there, they bring in the reserves, the National Guards into play, okay? But like I said, it's a different time now, and so the Second Amendment really should be rewritten just to address the civilian world and not include the military in it at all. They need to just erase that militia part out and just write that Second Amendment pertaining to just the general public, whether or not they should be armed, and if so, okay, who should have those guns. And it should be amended so that way it reflects, the 21st century instead. But you and I both know, you people out there watching, and I know, there's going to be a lot of resistance to that kind of logical analysis, okay? Because for many years, the people on the right have constantly reinterpreted the Second Amendment to fit today's times in their own version, okay? Even though what they're saying is not the definition of what was written, they're trying to redefine it, which really, in what they're doing, they're really saying in themselves, we need to rewrite the Second Amendment because we're quoting it, we're reciting it to you, our definition of it to you is what we want it to be, but it's not the way it was written, okay? They're trying to tell you what they want the Second Amendment to say, but it's not saying that, because it doesn't talk about the 21st century. It's talking about way back in the 1700s or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Okay, it doesn't reflect today. Those people back then could not see the way America was going to be 200-300 years later. They couldn't see that. They didn't realize how big our military was going to get, how powerful it would be, and how we wouldn't have to worry about making militias anymore, okay? But they couldn't possibly see how we would get so out of control with guns, how we're killing our children in schools and stuff like that. They would not want that, you know? They would not want that. What human being wants to see children killing children, you know? So I would say that they would probably, if they weren't going to rewrite the Second Amendment, they would probably add another amendment just under it, like 2A, that just talks about the civilian population and how they should be treated with that right or not the right to have a gun. Do they think they ought to have it or not? You know, and my opinion, I think they would probably say no. Okay, only law enforcement officials should be armed if they need it. Okay, that's what I would think. I'd say they would designate the police, you know, and any, you know, law enforcement agency to be armed to maintain control. Because if you put guns everywhere, okay, then you're even putting law enforcement at risk. You're even putting their lives in danger. Well, you don't want that. Okay, you want them to have the upper hand so that way they can control the situation to allow for a fair and just execution of law. You know, that's what you want. And so I feel like that's what they would say today. All right. I mean, if you look at all the other things they put down in there, I mean, they're trying to be conscientious. You know, of course, they were limited by the things that they believed at the time, but they generally were trying to be, you know, as progressive as they could, limitedly, you know. And I would say that today they would probably say something along those lines that, hey, look, you can't let just average idiots out there with a gun because they're not trained. They're probably not the best people for right and wrong. And so why don't we give that responsibility to just the police, and then they can have the guns, okay? They can have the guns. People don't need to go hunting anymore for food. I mean, they could buy their food anywhere they want. So they don't need to have a gun for that. But let the police take care of policing the country to make sure people, you know, stay within the boundaries of the law, you know. Because if you give them a gun, they'll shoot through that boundary. And before you know it, you know, the police aren't enough. And the government will be looking at sending the military in there to keep law and order, and we can't do that. You know, posse comitatus. You know, look it up. You know, the military can't be used against its own people. But if you allow this kind of level of law and disorder, you know, as I call it, what choice are you going to have? If you want to keep people, the civilians, in line, you're going to want. You know, you're going to want limits on what they can do. Military rule is a bludgeon. You know, it's not going to be a precision thing. Martial law and all that shit. You know, people aren't going to be happy with that. It never worked well in other countries, and it sure as hell ain't going to work here. So I would think that in the best interest of protecting people's freedoms, that at the very least, limiting who gets a gun is very important. And making sure that our police are able to maintain law and order is important. Defunding them is certainly not going to help the matter. You're just opening the door even wider for chaos, you know. And so you got to support the police. You got to fucking support limits on who owns a gun. You have to start there, you know. And people who show a degree of being, you know, unhinged, we'll just say domestic abusers, okay, people that have proclivities to beat others and cause fights, you don't want them to have a gun because, hey, I got a gun now, you know, and before you know it, they're going to be shooting everything, you know, pets and people and kids and, you know, what the hell. So you don't want that. You don't want that at all. And I feel like, you know, these I think are common sense, you know, ideas that I have. Common sense. I don't know what you'd call it. Does it make me, you know, a danger to the right wing? No. I'm actually protecting them. My ideas will be protecting them as well as the Democrats that I'm talking to. I can't imagine any Republican who would sit idle while their kids are shot dead by some guy who shouldn't have got a gun. How the hell can they still be loyal to the NRA or whatever is still running out there for gun owners? How can anybody want not have some kind of issue taken about a guy or a woman who got her hand or his hand on a gun when they have a history of beating people and or some kind of crime that involved violence, that, oh, for some reason they were still able to go to a store and buy a gun, okay? And background check, they didn't even get that. But they were still able to get their hand on a gun, and a few days after they got it, they used it on to settle some trouble that they were going through, and got somebody killed, or some innocent little kid killed, you know, and it could have been prevented if we had the laws in place that would prevent that. You know, certainly an eye for an eye doesn't stop things like this from happening. You know, because you got a gun, you can go out and take revenge on that person. Doesn't mean that somebody else somewhere else in the country isn't going to have that same problem happen to them. You know, so where does it end? You know, prevention is the only choice you got, really. It really is the only choice. Prevention. That means you got to have laws. You know, if you want to say, oh, you're taking away my rights, go ahead. Be that way. Learn the hard way, if that's what you think. But take it from the rest of us. You know, we got years and years and years and years of history to fall back on. The data that shows how a ban on assault weapons, we saw a drop in crime in this country. And when that ban was lifted, what was it, 10 years later? Crime went through the roof there. The fucking gun crimes went through the fucking roof after that ban was lifted. So don't tell me that it doesn't work. It does work. And then if you don't believe that, you can look at other countries who have stricter gun laws than we do, and their countries don't see daily fucking murders like that, like we got here. Okay, they think we're crazy, and they got every right to think that, because we are, for the most part, because we're ignoring evidence all around us that putting controls on people's right for a gun is the best way, you know, in order to maintain stability in our society, and to see a reduction in these mass killings, for Christ's sake. I mean, you got to think of that, you know. So anyway, that's it for today. So I hope everybody has a great rest of the week and upcoming work week. So subscribe, comment, and share. And please keep your ears open to any health matters out there. Protect yourself, and treat each other nice. And try not to get any political debates. You know, especially now, this is a very volatile election year, so it's best not to light that powder keg. So I'll talk to you all later. Take care. Bye-bye.